When I first saw the trailer for Forspoken a year and a half ago, I was amazed at the story and setting and the general gameplay as it looked pretty incredible, and I'm always for a new game from the creative minds at Square Enix. The game ended up getting delayed several times as it was initially supposed to release towards the beginning of 2022, then towards the middle of 2022, and then now it's got a set release date of January 2023. I forget, it's either 27th or 24th. And at the Game Awards 2022, the one we just had, we got a new trailer and the first public playable demo for the game. After spending some hours with the demo and playing through it 100%, I'm here to give you my thoughts on Forspoken and if it's worth trying out the demo and if you should spend your time and money on this upcoming release. Now, as far as the story goes, I can't really speak much on it as the game really only gives you the opening cinematic that tells you a brief bit about Frey Holland, who's the main character, and it's that she's from New York who eventually got isekai'd or transported to the world of Athia. She's thus given magical abilities from a magical bracelet that is also sentient, and is asked by the people of Athia to be their champion and save them from the corrupted benevolent sorceresses. And that's about it. You are thus thrown into the game and given the choice of trying out the incredibly brief tutorial or jumping straight into the action. Whichever way you go about it, you are given 5 objectives of which you will need to complete along with a confrontation with a boss at the end to clear the demo. There are dozens of mini quests and locations to check out along the way that will net you various stat buffs and items. When it comes to how the game plays overall, that is where you somewhat run into the first bump in the road, as I couldn't for the life of me not feel like I haven't played something similar to this before, and it's because I have, and that game is Infamous. The gameplay in Traversal is heavily reminiscent of Infamous, from the magic sprinting right down to the way Frey shoots her magic. And the general combat loop as a whole, well, it just feels like Infamous. The problem here is that Infamous pulled all of this off, in my opinion, far better and felt much smoother than what you would get here in Forspoken. Frey moves about with a bit of weight to all of her movements, and at points it can feel slightly sluggish or entirely sluggish depending on who you are, especially when you're fighting enemies and the game's camera and lock-on system decide to give you a rough go at it. One of the things I had to immediately do was increase the camera movement sensitivity as it just felt too slow and sluggish for me to deal with. You lock into enemies with R3 and can move between enemies with a flick of the stick, yet the problem here is how the camera recklessly moves about in the most inconvenient of positions to try and focus on that one enemy while zooming in uncomfortably close behind Frey to the point where you can't see the incoming attack indicator, but also the enemies around you. Next up is the way combat plays out, as you have offensive and defensive magic that can be utilized between taps and holding L2 and R2, with the ability to weapon wheel select which magic you want to use by holding down L1 and R1, and then moving the right stick to select the magic. You have 2 sets of magic abilities from Frey's magic, which is projectile based, in a third-person shooter style, and Sela's magic, which is melee-based, which is similar to a hack-and-slash style. What the game doesn't tell you, nor will you find it in the initial tutorial, is that the individual magic that you select have a 1 to 2 second cooldown that are assigned to the shoulder trigger taps. This information is buried within a gameplay section in the status menu, and because I didn't learn about this until much later, I was often blindly flailing about with Sela's magic sword, not knowing I had melee punches, nor a throwable spear, let alone all of the various defensive magical abilities. Another thing the game's demo and tutorial don't teach you about is what all you can do with skill trees, as you can get better proficiency with certain magic and experience if you set the active spellcraft challenges, and don't get me started on the nail painting system, which gives you a variety of buffs of which you can select for both the left and right hand. The game's parkour system is cool, as Frey can parkour over and around just about anything, along with utilizing it in battles to get around enemies and evade attacks. There's also a magical ability that allows you to pull yourself to various surfaces, and especially the magic protruding rocks, that you can use this ability in quick succession to scale the vast environment. This is also something the game doesn't tell you about, nor how to use it or what it's for, as again is buried in the gameplay overview in the status menu, and only did I learn about it due to trial and error. And another thing the game doesn't tell you is that you can use this ability to pull yourself to enemies, so there you go if you were curious about that. There's a crafting system in the game allowing you to craft new gear, as well as the ability to craft items and level up your gear and the various stats that you have, based on items that you find strewn about the field. You can also level up your magic and gain new abilities within the spellcraft skill tree, and also at various huts. And another thing is, if you're on the field, you can rest and restore your health. Just don't rest in the field, as you'll be susceptible to being attacked by monsters. Speaking of monsters, there are a few within this demo that range from the undead zombies, crocodiles, demonic flying beasts, small goblins, and a few others. Each has an attack pattern as well as a telltale that lets you know when to move to avoid getting hit, with none being too particularly difficult to defeat. The environment is vast, yet is in many ways empty, as there isn't really much going on, and you'll find yourself magic running from waypoint to waypoint just to get to your next objective, until you unlock the fast travel ability from towers and locations that you've reached on the map. Performance-wise, the game gives you the option to set the game to run at 4K with a locked 30 frames per second, as well as 2K resolution running at 30 frames per second, but with the added bonus of ray tracing, and then finally having a performance mode that seems to give you 1080p 60 frames per second, if not an upscale checkerboarded 4K 60 frames per second. If you have a TV or monitor that supports 120Hz, then you can have the gameplay at 1080p 120 frames per second. I personally put the game on performance, as I don't care about having 4K visuals or ray tracing if the trade-off is being stuck at 30 frames per second. While there's nothing wrong with 30 frames per second, I have personally been playing at 60 frames per second and above for so long now that 30 frames per second just seems sluggish to me. Another neat thing is you get a lot of options and accessibility options from this game, which is awesome. However, my main complaint is how off-center and hard to read, let alone understand, the user interface or UI is, because when you're trying to keep track of your health or magic meter, it's insanely small and hard to read, especially in the midst of battle. And when you get prompts of doing a damaging killing blow, even more so, as it can be hard to see the button prompt. In wrapping up my overall experience with the demo for Forspoken, I have to say that even though I have complained about a lot of the issues that this demo has, I also understand why it was delayed for an additional year, as even a month and a half out from release, this game is honestly, it's still fairly rough in a ton of areas that it honestly shouldn't be at this point. The camera needs a lot of work, along with the targeting system, and I also am hoping that it's overhauled to a more seamless experience. The combat flow has a bit of a learning curve that can feel unruly and chaotic, and the tutorials need to be better implemented than what they are. I have no complaints about the graphics, as the game looks awesome, but I do find that Frey is a bit too much of a potty mouth, and that's coming from someone who has a potty mouth. The demo did nothing but show to me that she's a bit of an asshole and is, for all intents and purposes, a try-hard edgelord with quips that often fall flat when she's bantering with her magic cuff. Forspoken has a lot of potential, but as it is, with the learning curve and rough around the edges controls, I think it has its work cut out for it within the next month and a half before its release. But hey, don't just take my word for it. Try the demo today and experience this for yourself.